I want to talk about something that I find really not just annoying, but I think is even detrimental. And I know this might be a bit on the spectrum for a lot of people because it's going to sound like an insignificant, unimportant, minor little nitpicky detail. But I think it plants a seed in the mind that is not just inaccurate, but actually a liability. And that is the idea when people talk about the evolution of consciousness or spirituality or certain kind of psychological perspectives or that sort of thing, they refer to frequency and how they need to raise their frequency or techniques to raise one's frequency. This is not just, it's not just a silly idea, it's completely wrong. Even when you just think about the application of frequencies, at what point, in what application, is a higher frequency better than any other frequency? I understand that the idea of frequency is a metaphor, but a metaphor is supposed to compare two things to show their likeness, and that is absolutely not the case when we're talking about spiritual evolution or consciousness evolution and frequency. How is this more evolved than this? Besides the obvious that one is not better than the other, if anything, the lower frequency is a lot more tolerable than the higher frequency, not unlike people who think they are a higher frequency than people who are lower frequencies. They're equally intolerable. But the bigger problem with the concept of frequency is it's a one-dimensional description for a multidimensional state of being in a multidimensional universe. A better example as to the shortcomings of frequency is if we were to take a look at a picture, for example, and we were to look at just the low frequencies. And then we were to slide across the higher and higher frequencies, starting with red, which is the low frequency, and then moving up to blue, which is the higher frequency. We would see something that looks like what you're seeing now. This shows the different frequencies of a particular picture. And it's garbage, whether it's low frequency or high frequency. It's an almost useless piece of information. Sure, there's some information there, and it's actually confusing, deceiving, because for those who believe frequency is actually a metaphor that applies to reality, they're going to think the high frequency useless garbage image is somehow significantly more important or more evolved than the lower frequencies. The blue garbage is obviously better than the red garbage because it's a higher frequency. The more metaphorically correct example, if we're going to use this picture as a metaphor, is to start out looking at the low frequencies, start at the bottom, and rather than looking at just the higher frequencies, incorporating higher and higher frequencies into the picture. And now you see we're starting to get a more holistic view of what all of these different frequencies, when brought together as one, represent. And now it makes sense. Now we can understand it, and we have a far more complete picture. Okay, so how does that apply, if we would apply this metaphor to the metaphor of frequencies as far as consciousness and evolution and spirituality? How does that apply? Well, the application is you need the low frequencies and the high frequencies together. Sure, you may want to raise your frequency in order to get that higher frequency information, but you also want to lower your frequency to get the lower frequency information. It's not about going higher. I mean, this is a very Western concept that it must be higher, bigger, faster, stronger. The more effective approach is to broaden your perspective. You need to go into the mud as well as into the stars. If you just go into the stars, going only into the stars is as useless as just going into the mud. You obviously need both. You need the sky, you need the earth, you need both. But the problem is people who are floating around only in the stars think that they are making progress when in fact they're not. They're actually hindering progress. In fact, they may even have double the work to do because they're going to have to go all the way back to their low frequencies. Jung addressed a similar concept when he talked about having to embrace your dark side. I mean, if we're talking about spiritual consciousness concepts, the Jungian model of the dark side is perfect because we tend to think of that as the lower frequencies. The more violent, the more reactionary, the more negative emotions like greed or jealousy, envy, or an imbalanced attention on service to self versus service to others. That would be kind of qualities of the dark side. And the key point here is an imbalanced attention, because you need to take care of yourself and you need to take care of others if a community or a society, which is inevitable that we live in such, even if we are living alone in the woods, we're living in an integrated environment with the trees and the plants and the rivers and the sky and whatever. No matter where we exist, we are integrated into the environment. If we are disintegrated in that environment, we will not flourish and our material presence might come to an end. That's kind of what extinction is. So if you are on a path of evolving your consciousness, this model is probably going to serve you much better than just the idea of raising your frequency. And from a thelonic perspective, it's also much more practical, because the bigger the difference between the 2 points that represent the two extremes of any instance, any context, any scope, there's going to be a high and a low, or whatever, a minimum and a maximum, whatever it happens to be. There's going to be limits to a system, the lower limit and the higher limit, however we measure it. The wider those limits, the bigger the difference between them, the larger the field of expression. If you are purely a high frequency person, you have an extremely narrow band to create new experiences in your reality, your world. Whether it's a low band or a high band or a middle band, it doesn't matter. If you have a narrow band, you have narrow opportunity. The wider the band, the wider the opportunity. That's like the definition of what voltage is, right? The potential, the difference between the high and the low. The bigger the potential, the more voltage. The more voltage, the more energy. The more energy, the more ability to use that in whatever creative ways you want to. So what that means in a practical day-to-day sense is, in a physiological sense as well, is recognizing like the reptilian part of your being, the dark part, the evil part, the ferocious part, as well as the divine part and the spiritual part and the angelic part. If you can recognize both of those, the spectrum across which you can operate is not only significantly greater, your vision of the way reality really is a lot clearer. And when we begin to see the more holistic, wider, multidimensional, complete picture, or more complete picture of reality, then our relationship to reality changes for the better, in case that needs to be said. That's it.